What it freaking isn't is a magic wand. I just broke my red pen. It's not a magic wand. And what it freaking isn't is China paying direct revenue to the US government. It's freaking not that. It's way complicated. This isn't even the beginning of it. It is not even like, it is way complicated. And anyone who's out there saying like, hey, tariffs are a magic wand, it'll make us rich as a country. In the 1813s, we had this net revenue in the US. It's not the freaking 1813s anymore. It's not. And so waving this magic wand that's just going to fix everything, frankly, prey on ignorance because people don't understand US international tariff policies to be like, hey, it'll all be great because Trump's the beacon of truth. I am a Republican. I hope Trump does well. It's way more complicated than we're being sold. And there are some parts of this policy that I actually quite like. I hate the inaccuracies of it. I hate the demagoguery of it, right? I hate the fact that people are like, oh yeah, it's just going to fix everything.
I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Jeremy Watson. Over the past 25 years, I've started 30 companies. Currently, I am running 7. I've spent 10 years adjacent to financial advice. In that time, I was consulting full-time on about $300 million. My goal with this channel is to let you follow along and watch as I build 7. I'm going to share as much good knowledge as I can for free, hopefully to do some good in the world while sharing some interesting stuff. If that interests you, follow along. I appreciate you watching.
April 2nd was Liberation Day by the Trump administration. And so all week long, there's been information, misinformation. I'm going to call it propaganda on both sides when it comes to, are the tariffs good or are the tariffs bad? But I must have missed the class in high school or junior high or college that was Tariffs 101. So that's what I want to have a conversation around today is like, how do tariffs work and how do they affect the U.S. consumer? How do they affect U.S. manufacturing? How do they affect foreign manufacturing? And it got complicated enough that you join me today in my basement, which is an unfinished basement, but which I do have the whiteboard of doom because I love whiteboards, and whenever my team's getting together trying to plan out something huge and complicated, we look at the whiteboard of doom. And so I'm going to share the whiteboard of doom with you today. We're going to maybe get another light or two if you all like this style of content where I'm just explaining big, complicated ideas on the whiteboard. But let's start it like this. This episode brought to you by Crash Pads, one of the many companies I own. But it is a imported product from China. We get it manufactured in China for a whole bunch of reasons. And we'll talk about kind of the import process and setting up supply chains, even for a small company like Crash Pads that's done like 250,000 units in its existence. We're not talking AirPods. We're not talking Samsung Galaxies. We're talking just the simplest product you can get, a hydrocolloid bandage for active use when you wreck on your bicycle or your skateboard. So with that being the case, we're going to talk about Crash Pads a lot because I own one of these businesses that's being affected. I just wrote like a $6,000 hire check because of the Trump tariffs. And let's just talk through how that's going to work. Foreign manufacturer is the first player we need to discuss. The second player we're going to talk about is a importer or a retailer or a wholesaler. For the purposes of this conversation, we're going to say that Crash Pads, which is a company I own that produces an active bandage, is an importer / retailer. All right? We order our product right now from China. So we're going to, for this conversation, say China is where the foreign importer resides. And we're going to talk about what it takes for me to actually import our bandages from China and how that changes with tariffs. So let's just go and say, okay, to get a box of Crash Pads from China, it's a process, okay? Number one, to get the first box of Crash Pads from China, this was when my brother still owned the company and he was still running it, but I was aware of the process. What he had to do is, there's not one foreign manufacturer that is China. there's a whole ton of representatives of foreign companies, and you have to work with representatives' agents, and you have to get samples of the product you intend on buying shipped into the US. And so before we ever ordered the first bandage, before we ever sold the first bandage, we went to, let's say, 10 different US and Chinese manufacturers of hydrocolloid bandages. All right? China, 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 US, 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 China, Bangalore. We went to all of these foreign manufacturers before we ever sold our first bandage, when we still just had the idea of selling bandages. And we said, hey, we are interested in doing this athletic bandage. We want it to be slick. We want it to stay on. We want it to be waterproof. We told them all of the things we wanted from the bandage. And they said, yes, we have a product that will do that, or we don't. Because not every bandage company that produces a hydrocolloid bandage produces the type that we want, or the size that we want, or the stickiness that we want. And so we ended up saying, okay, these companies say they can't produce it at all. These companies say they can produce it. And this company says, the US company might say, hey, ours is going to be 10 cents per bandage. The Chinese company might say, hey, ours is going to be 3.5 cents per bandage. Something like that. All right? And so what we did is we said, okay, more than anything, price point, we got to know quality. And so we went to all of the companies that said they could produce the type of bandage that we were after, the specs that we were after, the sizes that we were after, the stickinesses that we were after. We said to all those companies, okay, send us a sample of your product. And each company said, okay, to do a sample test, it's going to be $60. Okay? So this company, we paid $60. They sent us a sample. This company sent us a sample of their work. We paid $60 for shipping and whatever the crap, right? This company sent us a sample of their stuff. We paid $60. This company sent us a sample of their stuff. We paid $60 or $120 or whatever it cost us to do our sampling. So with that being the case, we were building a supply chain. We brought in a ton of samples from US and Chinese manufacturers. And at the end of the day, we used those samples. As my brother was actually getting into bike wrecks, he would put these samples on and see how they worked, how they stayed, how sticky they were, how thick they were, how much goo they absorbed. He was doing just all this testing because he's always getting bunged up, and he was designing this company from the ground up, and he was trying to use these samples. Number one, he was trying to get his money out of his $60 or $120 per sample pack that they had sent in. Number two, he was trying to see which one he really liked the most. And at the end of the day, he chose a Chinese manufacturer for about 3.5 cents a bandage, or something like that. Now, those aren't the exact numbers, but I'm going to give you the generalities of it. We sell crash pads now on Amazon and on our website. A box of mediums, which I think are, off the top of my head, 4x4, 4 inches by 4 inches. We sell that box, I think it has 8 bandages in it, for $24.95. So let's break down profit in there. And so you can see every piece. To get that bandage printed, and as an importer, I've found that I have to buy these bandages in basically units of 20,000, right? This box has 8 of them. To get these printed in China, or to get these printed in the US, I'm ordering in 20,000 bandages at a time. And if you order less than 20,000 bandages, you have what are called short runs. And so you pay a little bit extra because they set up their machines, they set up their dies, they set up their casting, they set up your specifications, and they just didn't run 20,000. And they're like, hey, it doesn't even make sense if we don't print 20,000 bandages. And so when we order mediums, large, extra large in our product, all divided out into their associated boxes, when they come in, the boxes are about the size of 3 medium-sized SUVs. We store those all. We ship them to Amazon, we ship them to our partners, we ship them to who needs them. But you've got to keep in mind, when you're ordering something from China, so you're usually ordering in the pallet load. You're usually ordering by the shipping container load. You're dealing with these enormous numbers. And so even though for one box of crash pads, to get them here in the market, let's say that I buy this 8 bandages, packaging, printing, delivered in market. Let's say I buy this for $10. And let's say that Amazon's fee on these bandages is another $7. And let's say that I'm $17 into this thing that I'm selling for $24.95. And so I'm going to make another $7. With that $7, I have to do enough units to pay my staff. No one works for less than 20 bucks an hour these days. That's any, that I pay. I tend to overpay a little bit. I can't get a salary on my books these days for less than $3,500 to $4,000 a month for a person to work for me full time. And with benefits, that's more like $6,000 a month. So my minimum full-time employee is between $5,000 to $6,000 a month. Again, I always typically overpay a little bit. But with that being the case, that profit is about $7. If I have one employee running crash pads and I'm paying a full-time salary, if it's all that it takes, no storage, no nothing, then that one employee, we've got to do 1,000 units a month. And that's going to give us $7,000 of net profit. What is my marketing cost actually going to be to get those units off? It's all working at crash pads. It's all working. It's growing. Now here's how tariffs affect this business, which is like every business you can imagine that imports anything from another country. All right? Because I'm importing this from China, and we're just going to assume that we're talking a 20% US or Chinese import tariff, what that's going to do is that's going to take my purchase price from China from $10 a box to $12 a box. That's a 20% tariff. 20% tariff. I'm going to be at 20% on the stuff I'm importing, and that's going to be everything that I pay to them. And so this order of bandages that we just completed, and they kind of dragged their feet because they knew tariffs were coming. And so I got a bid for this last order of bandages for $25,000 to bring in 10,000, 15,000 large bandages, 15,000 medium bandages, 15,000 extra large bandages. It was $25,000 was the bid. That bid, now that it's April 2nd, and we just couldn't get back and forth. I think they were honestly dragging their feet a little bit because they knew the run was going to be after tariffs. They wanted to see what happened. And so they were just hard to get back and forth from and to do the work. That bid is going to go up by 20%. Okay, because of the Trump tariffs. And so the bill that I was looking at just a couple days ago, $25,000, we haven't paid that yet. We're actually in the final processes of finalizing that order. We've already got inventory on the ground in the US. I'm gonna have to pay $5,000 more because of the tariffs. That's how it works. I pay the tariffs. The person who's bringing the item in from overseas, I pay the tariffs. And then what I'm going to have to do is I'm gonna have to say, okay, these cost me $12 a bandage. Amazon's slice of this is a percentage. And so if they're going to cost me $2, 20% more, Amazon's percent is also going to go up by 20%. So just assume that that's going to happen all down the board. Just assume it's a flat tariff on the whole price. So $24.95, that is going to end up going up by something like 20%. And for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to call this $25. And so that product is going to go up by 20% effectively, which means my new price on Amazon is going to be $30. It's going to cost $5 more a box. For me to maintain effectively the same profit margin, for me to effectively pay my people, for me to effectively pay Amazon their higher percentage because I'm charging more for the bandages because I've got to eat a $2 tariff per box, I'm going to have to just raise my prices by $5 a box. Okay? So that brings us to number one. What's Trump's stated goals? What the Trump administration's stated goals when it comes to tariffs? Number one, revenue. He says, the administration says that by doing tariffs, they can raise up to $600 billion a year for the next 10 years. All right? Trump talks about tariffs candidly as if they are a magic wand, as if no one else in the history of US macroeconomics has ever looked at tariffs and said, hey, there's this thing called tariffs out there. It's as if he has stumbled into this word, tariffs, and is like, this is a magical thing. There's no downside. It's going to be so much money, it's ridiculous. Every problem is going to be solved. We're going to pay off the national debt. He acts about tariffs the way a child acts about candy. There's no downside to candy, right? Without realizing there are clear downsides to candy. There's a whole ton of downsides to processed sugar, to chocolate. You get fat, you get like whatever. He just acts like there's just no downside to anything he says. That's one of my biggest complaints with Trump, is he just doesn't ever have a nuanced conversation about anything, and he expects people just to accept it. Now, Trump is not my touchstone of truth, and so the number one thing I would like to look at is revenue. Okay? Number two, jobs. Okay? He says by doing tariffs, we're going to have more jobs. We're going to bring jobs back to the US. That's an interesting thing. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about, do we think it will affect revenue? Tax revenue, aka taxes? All right, revenue paid to the government. This $5 right here that I'm paying, where is that going? All right, it's actually being billed at time the product comes in. It's a complicated process, but that extra $5 I pay in import effectively taxes when I bring things in. Tariffs, import tariffs. So that money goes directly to the government. So we can say that money is a direct tax, right, that I am paying as the importer of a product. That $5 right here is revenue. Okay? And if me and everyone like me who works with any manufacturer outside of the country actually continues to import and we keep consuming at the same levels, then we're talking we will produce revenue. What the Trump administration is saying is we will produce $600 billion a year in revenue for 10 years. I'm assuming they're just taking the current production, the current import levels from other countries and saying, hey, we're going to get $5 per box of Bandage from Jeremy and Crash Pads and every other company like Jeremy and Crash Pads. And if we do that for the next 10 years, it's going to be $600 billion, assuming nothing else changes. I'm assuming that's how they're kind of getting to that math. What you've got to understand is this $5 is not actually paid by me. Right? This $5 is actually paid by you. It's paid by the end consumer. Because I don't have enough margin built into this product to take my profit on this product from $7 a box to $2 a box. All right? Because then to pay my one employee I have, for example, a salary, $4,000 a month plus benefits, I would have to magically increase the number of units I'm selling per month from 1,000 to 3,500. All right? In order for me just to eat this tariff and say, hey, we're just gonna, like, the companies will figure it out. The companies will figure it out. Crash Pads and every other company like Crash Pads, Amazon, eBay, Overstock, Walmart, every company that imports anything from out of the country, they'll just figure it out. I can't figure it out, right? There's not enough money. I'm not, like, if I'm not doing 3,500 units a month, I cannot pay this employee without going into my own pocket. And the truth is, maybe I'll do that for a little while to keep good employees on and to figure out what we're going to do. But no company has infinite money. They've all got to make decisions based on, hey, what is profitable? And so the easiest way to deal with this tariff is just increase my price from $24.95, $25 a box to $30 a box. I pass the tariff cost right on to you. Yes, the government creates the revenue. They do get that $5. But it is effectively a new sales tax of 20%. Very important to understand. A tariff, fundamentally, in the way that it plays out in the economy, is effectively a 20%, if that's what the tariff is, sales tax on American consumers. The foreign company, this Chinese manufacturer, nothing is changing for them. I'm buying $25,000 of bandages. I'm paying them the same $25,000. I'm paying import tariffs of $5,000. That $5,000 is going directly to the government. I'm passing that $5,000 through the pricing of my product directly to the consumer because I don't have that in my margin. And then I'm passing that directly to the consumer. And so the consumer is effectively paying $5 more a box for a box of Crash Pads. And they're going to pay $30 for something they used to pay $24.95 for. And that $30, $5 is going to go to the government. It is going to create revenue, that $600 billion of revenue. But it is effectively a sales tax on every product that is imported. Okay? We all have to just admit that, right? The Chinese manufacturer is not paying a penny of that. I, the importer, am. And the Chinese manufacturer is not paying any of that to the government. I, the importer, am. And I, the importer, probably don't have the margins because most things in a capitalist society run on as thin margins as they can without being put out of business by their competitors. So every company's got pressure downward on pricing. And so we are all running our businesses at the margins we can afford with the competitions in the market. There are other hydrocolloid bandages on the market. They're not as active use. They're not as designed as well to be waterproof. They aren't designed to be worn when you're biking or when you're hiking or when you're whatever. Crash Pads has a niche. However, if you can buy another hydrocolloid bandage for 17 bucks a box, which is what you can, and ours is an active use bandage really built to do this very specific thing. Maybe you'll pay a premium because it'll stay on when you're biking or hiking or, you skin your knees skating or one-boarding or surfing or whatever. Maybe you'll buy that because it's built just a little bit better for active use and a little bit more waterproof. Maybe we can get a premium. But what I can't do is charge 30 bucks a box when my competition are charging $16.99 a box. I can't charge $100 a box when my competition are charging $16.99 a box, because eventually you'll just buy my competition's product and wrap it in Coband, the plasticky pink stuff, right? Eventually you'll just be like, dude, it's a lot less expensive. Instead of buying Crash Pads, I'm just going to buy this other thing. I'm going to wrap it in Coband. Sure, it's a lot less effective. Sure, I got to buy two things. Sure, I got to keep wrapping it to get it kind of waterproof, and it's not really waterproof. Like, sure, it doesn't have exactly the same benefits that Crash Pads have, but it's also like half the price, right? So we all have downward pressure in a capitalist economy to keep our prices as reasonable as possible. We all have a profit margin that kind of makes sense to run our business. And if we're going to just slap a 20% flat tariff on that, my costs are going to go up by 20%. I'm just going to call a spade a spade. That's what everyone's going to do in the import space who's buying stuff from anywhere. Now, here's where the other pieces get interesting. He says this will bring jobs back to the US, which is complex. I'm going to be honest. To set up this one supply chain, to go out and test different hydrocolloid bandages and have the back and forth conversations, it took us probably 8 months. Because we had to order the samples, and then we had to use the samples in all sorts of different circumstances. Like we were wearing them in the shower. My brother was wearing them in the shower. He was wearing them when he got torn up. He was wearing them, he tried them on different places. He put one on one leg and one on the other leg. He put one on one arm and one on the other arm. And he actually used these samples to see how they performed over time. It's called product testing. Every company in the world is going to do some level of product testing. But to even set up this one supply chain from China, just for Crash Pads, it took us about 8 months, and it took us about $3,000 to $5,000. And my brother wasn't paying himself at the time. And so if he had had staff in place, let's say one person on a salary, that's another $6,000 a month while the business is trying to figure out the supply chain and iron out all the kinks. Just to put this one order in for $25,000. I bought Crash Pads, 3 months ago. We have been going back and forth on emails with China trying to specify it because they forgot that the last order we placed, which was about a year ago, that it was a black polyurethane coating that we use on ours instead of a traditional hydrocolloid bandage, which is like just kind of a Band-Aid style exterior. And the reason for that is because it's waterproof. And our bandages that's one of the big things. They're waterproof. And so we print it on a polyurethane backing, but they forgot about that. And so they sent us a whole bunch of mock-ups that were like flesh colored, skin colored. And we said, that's not the way our bandages look. So we had to send an email back to China that says, hey, here's our bandages. Here's how they look. Here's how we want them to look. And they're like, right, that is right. And so because of the Trump tariffs and because communication with any supplier isn't like seamless and flawless, and because there are language barriers and time change barriers between here and China, the truth is it's taken us this whole time to get our first reorder reprocessed through our Chinese manufacturer. Now, we did all these different versions of bandages before we brought in our first Crash Pads, and it was for a lot of reasons. If I'm totally honest, our manufacturer in China, their product was just great. It was just a great product. Nothing against American manufacturers, but we just liked the product. It had it absorbed better, it stuck better. Just every piece about it was a really well-built bandage. And we're like, hey, we can put our name on that. We can put our reputation on that. It's a really well-built bandage, right? We really are proud of the product. So with that being the case, the only way jobs come back to the US, the only way jobs come back to the US is if I say to myself, you know, this tariff means that buying from China is going to be 20% more expensive. And this goes back to some of the initial math we talked about. Buying from China is going to be 20% more expensive. If you go way over here to the beginning, my per bandage cost in the US was about $10. All right? So, US cost about 10 cents a bandage. China cost about 3.5 cents a bandage. Effectively, by adding a tariff to this, they have increased my Chinese cost on a bandage to about 0.38 cents a bandage. So it hasn't closed that gap nearly enough. And I'm going to be perfectly candid. It's because in China, their wages are catastrophically lower than the US. In China, their environmental protections are catastrophically worse than the US. And there's a lot of reasons I would love to buy a US bandage. But candidly speaking, I didn't find any US bandages that I liked as much for the build quality as the Chinese bandages for about half the price. The tariff isn't going to close that gap. After all of the import fees on a bandage, we're talking, hey, about $10 a box to get a bandage into the US. So we were talking about how there is no way to look at tariffs that a foreign country is paying them. A foreign country, their imports are being affected. How much they sell in the US is being affected. But effectively, at the end of the day, it is our retail prices that are going to go up. That retail price increase is called a tariff. It's paid by the importer. It's effectively a sales tax, a 20% sales tax if we're going with 20% as the number we are using. And so that brings us back to jobs, which we were talking about before I took my break. If you're looking at jobs, the idea behind the tariffs is, okay, Jeremy, I would probably be happier if these bandages were made in the USA. I'll be totally honest. I'd love to have more US-based jobs. We sourced US bandages before we did any of this. All right, we had US bandages in the mix as, hey, where are we going to buy our bandages from? And even if it cost a little bit more to go with US bandages, I would have liked it. Problem is, we couldn't get the quality we wanted from a distributor we wanted. And someone may be watching this and be like, we can totally produce a crash pad. Feel free to reach out, DM me. We'll have a conversation. I'll happily look at other supply chains. Here's the biggest problem with this. Number one, the 20% tariff doesn't actually affect us enough, so it closes this gap, right? You'd have to say, okay, it's a 200% tariff, right? But that would have to be really targeted at bandages, because a 200% tariff on steel, where the margins are not that big, it wouldn't work. And so tariffs would have to be really hyper-targeted industry by industry by industry in order for them to have the right amount of effect. Because you would have to go industry by industry. Like the Commerce Department would really have to do a ton of math on this. And they would have to say, hey, in bandages, we're half the price to import them. So we need to do a 200% tariff so that our bandages cost effectively the same as their bandages. However, let's say that's what they did. Let's say they took all the time and all the math and they said, hey, we're going to make US manufacturing, even though our US manufacturing with the cost of living in the US, we would have to effectively double the price of the product for US manufacturing to be competitive with foreign manufacturing, which I'm not even saying that's what we want to do. I'm not even saying that's the strategic vision of the US, is to manufacture every single thing that we use in the US and in the US. But let's just say that's what we were going to do. Let's say they came in with a 200% tariff. And let's just redo the math with a 200% tariff. I had a green one. I don't anymore. All right, so a 200% tariff, let's just assume that's what they decided to do. So now my buy price at a 200% tariff, it cost me $20 to bring in a bandage. All right. Amazon, they're proportional. They just charge a percent of the total sale fee. That's going to go up. So now that's $14. My profit's going to stay the same, $7. 20, 14, 7. That's going to be $40 just to get the product on the shelf. And to maintain the same exact profit margin. 20, 30, 41. $41, right? If we just said, hey, in bandages, for example, let's assume China is half the cost of the US to produce. Even if they said, hey, we're going to double 200% tariff on the thing, that effectively means if I kept my profit margin the exact same and our distribution took a percentage like most do, we just brushed up everything. It'd be, okay, we used to buy this product for $24.95. Now we buy this product for $41. That delta, so $25 up to $41 is 16 bucks, right? And so that delta is going to revenue, and it would help create some revenue. But the US consumer went from paying $24.95 for a bandage to $41 a bandage, no matter what. Now, if we did that, it would affect jobs. Because then I could say, hey, I'm able to just buy my bandages in the US. I'll go and I'll redo the supply chain construction. I'll get every bandage producer in the US to send me stuff. I'll spend this couple months. It's going to take less time because I'm not shipping all the way in from China. I like a lot about this, all right? We're going to do the supply chain construction again. We're going to do the quality test again. I'm going to pay my people who are already on my payroll to keep being on my payroll. We're going to weather some bumps and bruises. I'm not going to let anyone go. I'm just going to do exactly this. And at the end of the day, my bandages are going to be $41 a pop. And the US, every consumer just accepts that. Hey, we're going to be $41 a pop because the tariffs mean that there's a 200% sales tax on this product. And we've decided that manufacturing in the US is worth paying $41 a box of bandages instead of 24 boxes of bandage. And we're all getting some net benefit out of this, right? The government is getting a ton more money, except it doesn't. It doesn't. It freaking doesn't. If this is what we're shooting for, if we're shooting for jobs, as soon as I buy this product US, right, then I'm not importing anymore. As soon as I buy this product from a US manufacturer, then I'm not importing anymore. And so as soon as I buy this from US, even if they jacked the tariff through the roof and they made it so that it was actually more cost effective to buy US than to buy foreign, that means I'm not importing anymore. And so that means the tariffs aren't existing anymore. You know, when we go back over here and we say, what's happening here? He was paying $24.95. They slapped a 200% tariff. That's another 20 bucks, 14 bucks, 41 bucks in all, or whatever that math ends up being, right? That extra $16 is only existing in the concept of I'm importing from China at a 200% tariff. Right? As soon as I say, well, US manufacture is cheaper and quicker and better, and I'd rather be employing freaking US citizens anyways, I agree. As soon as I do that, there is no revenue. As soon as I go for jobs, you either get revenue because you're importing from foreign countries, or you get jobs because you're working locally. Both have an increased price, right? The price is the same. The difference is the extra $16 going to someone here in a US factory to earn $60 an hour or $45 an hour and have good environmental controls. I think there's an argument for that. What there's not an argument for is that tariffs are this magic freaking wand that you can just wave at all the US's problems and they'll go away and prices will not go up. Because fundamentally, it's a sales tax. Whether it's a sales tax to onboard US jobs or whether it's a sales tax to increase government revenue, it's a sales tax. And at the end of the day, this is being paid for by the consumer. De facto in the US. Because it's an import tariff to the US. De facto, it is a sales tax to the US consumer because we're the only ones who are buying stuff in the US-ish, right? And so that says, okay, we may very well, if we have this tariff policy in place, we may very well have a position where we're saying to ourselves, okay, we have 20% tariffs. Let's just go back to this. I liked the 200% because it kind of let you know, okay, exactly what would have to do to onboard the jobs and for everyone to be a no-brainer. Well, let's onboard the jobs, right? There's one crucial thing that we've got to keep in mind when we're talking about onboarding jobs in the US. In order for tariff policy to work, for someone like me, who's actually dealing with this, who's actually writing an extra $5,000 check, and who hopes to write $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 checks. We hope to be placing these orders as we grow the company and perfect the marketing monthly, right? For someone like me to say, okay, it is worth it for me to go back through and rebuild a US supply line and redo sampling and redo testing and pay my people the whole time so that they're on board and so that I'm keeping my staff who's good staff and I don't want to replace, because in my businesses, we try to treat everyone like, like they matter to us, not family, they matter to us. All right. And so in order for me to go and do all this work, all right, I have to believe that it's going to be worth my effort. I have to believe it's going to be worth between 8 months to 12 months of my hard work to rebuild a different US-based supply chain in order for this all to make sense. The rebuilding of the supply chain, right? Order samples, talk to a whole ton of people, pay my people's salary to go talk to 10 different US-based hydrocolloid bandage producers, have them send us samples, wear the samples, have my people be like, okay, give these out to everyone have them wear them when they're all torn up from a bike accident, right? Like, we're going to go through that. We're going to go through and say, hey, can you print on polyurethane, or can you print on like a KT tape style thing? Where it's going to be work, right? There's going to be rework to retool the supply chain, even if I want to bring it back to the US. And I don't mind that idea, right? But even if I want to do that, it's going to take months. And I, as a retailer, am going to have to spend money while making less. Because here's a couple of the things that this does, no matter how you slice it. Number one, I'm going to sell less Band-Aids. Because I know that people are going to buy fewer Band-Aids at $30 than $24.95. So I have to brace for that. I have to say, hey, I used to sell 1,000 units a month. But if you want to decrease how much anything sells, just make it more expensive. All right? Think of how often you used to go to the movies versus how often you go to the movies now. Think about how often you used to eat steak versus how often you eat steak now. Think of how often you used to go for a long drive when gas was 70 cents a gallon versus how often you go for a long drive. And so we're going to sell less because it's more expensive. Now, if it was $41 a bandage box, we would sell demonstrably less, because that's double the price, maybe half the purchasing, but we're going to sell less. And so what we're going to see nationwide is we're going to see prices increase by, maybe 20%, 30, 40, 50%. I looked at the charts this morning and I was like, well, those are madness, and we'll have to get into that in a different video, specifically all of the, like, how in the crap did they come up with these foreign tariff numbers, because none of them actually add up to a specific product category, and tariffs are based on product categories and trade agreements. And as I was researching it this week for like 20 hours, I realized, like, the trade agreements allow a certain number of items to be imported because everyone's sharing on social media, hey, Canada has a $250 milk import tariff, but it turns out when you research that, instead of a meme on Facebook, they can import a certain number of things under, like, the 2020 trade agreement, which was negotiated, I believe, by Trump. And then they have a tranche system where they have more and more of a tariff, and that their maximum, it was at 250%, or that's what I thought I understood, even though I'm not an economist, I'm an entrepreneur. And so the maximum is 250%, and then someone slaps that on a meme and demagogues the whole country, being like, hey, Canada's taking horrible advantage, where it's like, actually, we agreed to a free trade agreement with Canada. Trump negotiated it, Trump signed it, and then Trump says, hey, we got a horrible deal here with Canada. Well, you probably shouldn't have signed it back in 2020, but I digress. What it freaking isn't is a magic wand. I just broke my red pen. It's not a magic wand. And what it freaking isn't is China paying direct revenue to the US government. It's freaking not that. It's way complicated. This isn't even the beginning of it. It is not even, like, it is way complicated. And anyone who's out there saying, like, hey, tariffs are a magic wand, it'll make us rich as a country. In the 1813s, we had this net revenue in the US. It's not the freaking 1813s anymore. It's not. And so waving this magic wand that's just going to fix everything, frankly, prey on ignorance because people don't understand U.S. international tariff policies to be like, hey, it'll all be great because Trump's the beacon of truth. I'm a Republican. I hope Trump does well. It's way more complicated than we're being sold. And there are some parts of this policy that I actually quite like. I hate the inaccuracies of it. I hate the demagoguery of it, right? I hate the fact that people are like, oh yeah, it's just going to fix everything. It's not. It's at the very least going to increase prices and reduce revenues. It's at the very least going to do that. So I'm going to sell less. If I was a different guy, I broke my red pen by throwing it at the floor. I've mended it. At the very least, I'm going to sell less, because at the very least, my costs are going up. Period. At the very least, if I want to U.S. onboard the jobs that used to be out of country, at the very least, I have to redo a ton of work and take a lot less revenue, which probably means I have to increase my costs again because I'm doing a ton of unpaid work again that was done. We had a good functioning supply chain and we were making some profits, and now we don't, right? Or now it's a lot more expensive. At the very least, I'm going to have to increase my prices. I'm going to sell less units, and I'm probably going to have to lay someone off. I'm going to be honest. I don't see there's a way in the size of crash pads. If I had this employee, which I don't, I actually only have one employee and he's an equity partner, so we're both just going to make less. But if I had an employee in this situation where I had one salaried employee kind of doing the day-to-day, this is a big enough mess that depending on how many units less we sell a month, let's say our profit drops from 1,000 units a month, or our sales drop from 1,000 units a month, making us $7,000. We increase our prices, and let's say our unit sales drop to 800 units a month. Times $7 equals $5,600. I can't even pay that $6,000 salary anymore. Right? I've just locked myself into a $400 a month net loss. I'm not getting paid a penny. So I'm going to have to let that person go, and I'm going to have to go to part-time people. Because with part-time people, you're not paying all the benefits that you pay for full-time people. And so it's like immediately, as soon as I sell less, you're going to see people cut labor force in the U.S., which directly affects the jobs in the U.S. So the people who used to work in this company, you're going to see people reduce their workforces. Because if you're selling less, you just have to trim. And where's my number one fixed cost in here? Well, I'll buy fewer bandages, but really my profit's going to drop. And my fixed cost that I'm trying to spread over the number of bandages that I sell, that is going to be a component of labor and benefits. And so if I start selling, instead of 1,000 units, if I start selling 800 units at that $7 profit margin, hey, I just don't have enough to pay someone $6,000 a month. $4,000 a month plus benefits, Social Security, FICA, Medicare, all that contribution, 401k, any of that, medical, dental, none of that. And so we could really see, before we get to jobs being onboarded back to the US, we could actually see prices go up and workforces get squeezed and trimmed. So in the short term, we could absolutely see higher prices and fewer jobs, and the government revenue that they're projecting, just saying, hey, we're going to assume 20% tax on top of everything that we're currently importing, could actually not end up being $600 billion. It could end up being substantially less than that. Let's say that a 20% increase in prices reduces imports by 20%. Let's just say it goes up by 20% and the consumption goes down by 20%. And that this number isn't really factoring that. And so if that's the case, then we say, okay, minus 20%, that's going to end up being $480 billion of revenue over 10 years. Automatically, the revenue's less than we had projected. Depending on how they did their math, I can see the revenue not even being what they thought it would be. Now, let's assume that all of this happens, all right? And we survive with our employees, and we survive with the raises. I saw today the China tariff is like 36%. It's way more than 20%. And whatever, or something like that. I'll get into that next video. But let's assume that I do this. I rebuild a US-based supply chain. I'm buying US. That's cool. I like that. All right, so we do create some jobs. It's just not clean. There's no way that you can look at the complexity of tariffs and be like, hey, this is guaranteed. Like, it's going to bring down prices. The number of times I heard Trump on the campaign trail say that tariffs would not increase prices is baffling. Like, I saw it in at least 10 interviews because I watch politics and I hope Trump does well. and I'm a lifelong Republican. It's just not that straightforward, and there's a lot of different pieces in this. Number 3. The third reason that they say they want to do tariffs is defense. And that it's always been an issue. If you don't produce steel, I read an article the other day that said we only have one place in the world that can produce our tank because the thickness of or in the US that produces our tanks anymore, because the thickness of the steel isn't produced anywhere in the US. We have to either keep producing it at a loss because foreign steel is so inexpensive, or we have to import steel from China. And if we ever end up in a war with China for whatever reasons, and we have to import all of our steel from China, we're at a strategic military disadvantage because we can't guarantee that our supply lines are robust enough. That was tested and broken even worse in the pandemic. And the reason for that is, in the pandemic, we realized that superconductors and microchips, things that go in computers and cars by the hundreds, that we really didn't have that manufacturing in the US at all anymore. It was all in Taiwan and some in China, but mostly in Taiwan. And so superconductors and processing chips were all being done out of the States. And as soon as the pandemic hit and supply lines really started to break down, we realized that we didn't and couldn't produce chips in the US. And so they passed the CHIPS Act, which most Republicans didn't love. I think they like it now because they realize, hey, bringing processing of chips, production of chips into the US is actually incredibly valuable. And so there's actually some benefit fundamentally, like beyond the price, there's actually some net benefit to the country to bring in specific industries that we say, hey, these industries are necessary for our national defense. These industries are necessary that we control some level of the supply chains. These industries are important and keystone industries. That's not what's happening. Like a 20-30% tax on China isn't targeted enough to tax the industries that really, where China has been taking advantage and cheating. Like a 30% tax on Canada doesn't necessarily address, it's too broad. Like, this is something where you need to look industry by industry and decide what makes sense. And that's what they do when they negotiate these trade deals. And so they look at it piece by piece by piece, and they go back and forth and they negotiate these trade deals. And then all the countries involved in these trade deals kind of live up to their obligations or don't with respect to China. And then they all move along, and with friendlier countries with us live up better to their trade deals, and more contrary countries to us don't live up to their trade deals. But these are all like things that are expressed in explicit detail in these trade deals. Like, hey, we're going to have this much of a tariff on your milk at this many units and this many units and this many units, and you're going to have this tariff on our stuff. Unilaterally changing all that is a horrible move for U.S. everyone relations, because it makes us look nuts on the world stage. I'm just going to call a spade a spade. It makes us look nuts. Because unilaterally saying, hey, I know we have these trade deals, and I know all of your companies are working off of margins that, like, you've dialed all your margins in, and all your supply chains are set, and you've done all this work for every single product that you sell. You've done all this work, and you're making a living, but you're not making a killing. There's downward pressure on all of us. And so your companies are all making a living in every country that we do business with. Canada, Mexico, the US, we've all done this. We've all built supply chains over time and spent time and money and spent our thousands and onboarded stuff and brought in bandages. We've all done this. And a lot of companies have a lot more SKUs than me. They have tens or 10,000 different SKUs, and their supply lines are from Bangalore to China to Indonesia. And so now they're having to go through and calculate a 20% tariff here and a 33% tariff there. And they're having to go through their spreadsheets and be like, okay, we got to change everything. Like, we got to figure out if we're ever going to be profitable on our next reorder of this thing, or if we just bring it all home, because holy hell, this is getting insane. So this is like one product. There is value in national defense. I grant that. There is value in U.S. jobs. I can see that. There is revenue that comes. But I think if you look at it piece by piece, you'll realize that increasing prices will cause things to sell less, number one. Number two, as soon as we onboard U.S. jobs, we will not, what's the E, not equal? It's not going to equal revenue. As soon as jobs come back to the US, it's going to cut into this revenue number even farther. If we sell less units, it's going to cut into this revenue number even farther. If we eliminate this job and outsource it to a bandage company that's established in the US, it's not going to be in my town unless I happen to be the place where we manufacture bandages. So we're going to lose one local job for one conglomerate to kind of build a bandage company. And they're not going to replace it with one $6,000 a month job. They're going to replace it with a couple hours of time. So it's just not clean. So as far as revenue goes, I think this number is overstated. As far as jobs go, I think this number is overstated. As far as defense goes, I think that's valid, but I think it has to be a much more targeted approach where you actually take it industry by industry, and you got to do a study and figure out exactly which industries do we need here. And that's what they did the last time. Like, that's what the Trump administration did the last time. They looked at China and they said, hey, China's cheating in these specific ways, and we're going to attach these specific tariffs. And like almost all the economists I've read have gone through those tariffs and said, hey, were they a net positive or a net negative? And they said, well, they were actually really targeted to specific industries where tariffs made sense. And so the Biden administration, like, let them ride. They're all still in place today, and there's no way for us to go back and to say, like, hey, these tariffs were good or these tariffs were bad, right? There's no way. We're living with them, and there's no way to unwrap history like that. But everyone seems to agree that a targeted tariff regime in the US can and does make some deal of sense. Everyone also seems to agree, except for Trump and Trump loyalists, that, like, halo tariffs, where we're just slapping a flat percentage on everything in from a country, has these enormous ripple effects, especially in complex supply chains, where the supply chain's going out and in and out and in. Like the US auto manufacturing industry is so wrapped up with Canada and Mexico. I've read articles that say that a single car has parts that cross the border from US to Canada 5 to 20 times in the manufacture of that car. And so each time it crosses the border, it's an import or something. I don't even deal with that crap. But what I'm saying is it's complicated. It's complicated. Are you talking I'm going to pay a 20% tariff 20 times? Are you talking I'm paying a 20% tariff every time it changes the hand to a different company because that different company is a subcontractor? Or are you saying that I'm paying a 20% tariff just the one time, like the end user does it, even though I actually receive this and we have all these subcontractors all along the way, and all those subcontractors are paying this and they're giving me a finished product like fait accompli? And so if that's the case, it's complicated. It's certainly not like this simple magic wand that everyone just adapts to, all that we all just figure it out, right? So it creates this enormous administrative burden for companies to figure it out. But we got to figure it out because we live in the USA. Here's the problem. Here's the number one problem of the whole thing, right? Ready? The number one problem in this whole conversation, in my opinion, is what do they call it? Markets hate uncertainty. Uncertainty. Markets hate uncertainty. Now, if this tariff regime had been presented in such a way that they had talked about the specific tariffs that they're going to put in, and they talked about the specific reciprocal tariffs that they're looking at, and they're saying, hey, on this industry, in Band-Aids, China's producing at about half the cost, so we're going to put a 200% tariff in place. I might disagree with that, but I would understand what they're doing. My number one problem with this whole thing, markets hate uncertainty. And what that means is whatever this plan is on the tariffs, it needs to be expressed in a cohesive way. And there has to be some level of buy-in from the next administration. Because the next administration, if they come in, if 3.5 years from now, the next administration comes in and they just yank all these tariffs off, you can't make decisions going forward. And rebuilding a supply chain like this, I know is going to cost me 3 to 6 months, and I'm going to have to pay someone 3 to 6 months to help me do it. And if I think that this is a well thought out process, and I think that the next administration is going to say, hey, these tariffs are legitimate, like the targeted tariffs from Trump's first administration. If I think that these tariffs are going to be around in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, then I'm going to go through the hassle of onboarding a US supply chain. If I think that these tariffs are like not congressionally approved, not congressionally authorized, that they're effectively being put in place from the executive branch only, that they don't have buy-in from the broader government, that they just have buy-in from Trump and the Trump administration, and that the broader government doesn't agree with these tariffs, and that they're likely to get rolled back in the next administration, then the math is very different. Then the math isn't, hey, I got to go rebuild a US supply line. The math is, okay, I'm just going to leave my bandages at $30. I'm just going to pay the extra price. I know next administration, this is probably all going back to normal. And so in that situation, maybe I don't bring any jobs back to the US, because bringing back jobs back to the US involves reconstructing a supply line. Bringing jobs back to the US means there has to be a bandage company here that produces a similar quality product. Someone's going to have to build more bandage company capacity. I've looked at how much would it cost for me to produce these bandages US, and we're talking a $16 to $40 million factory and full-time employees. And so that is a whole nut I'm not going to crack right now. So someone's going to have to spend $14 to $60 million minimum to have a factory that's OSHA compliant, that's able to build bandages on this side of the sea. Like, someone's going to have to spend the money. And I'm just saying that person's not going to spend that money if they think the tariff regime is nuts, and they're probably going to go away. In the next administration, it's all going to go back to normal, and their bandage factory that they just built is going to become non-profitable, and they're just going to have a hole in the ground where they sunk $40 million. If the tariffs go away, no one makes the decisions that make the jobs happen. The only thing that happens is the government revenue happens, and I'm not even saying that is actually going to come out the way they think it's going to come out. I think it's a way overstated estimate. So with that being the case, if the jobs don't come back because of the uncertainty, then like half of the benefit is gone. Right? I would say my favorite benefit in this is the jobs. I don't care that this is the way the US government creates their revenue. I'd rather it not be like a stealth sales tax on everything we buy. That's crap. And I'd rather it not be a stealth sales tax. I would love a flat tax. Let's talk about that another day. But okay, maybe this is just getting complicated. There's just a lot of crap going on here. So, okay, the only way this works is if it's long and durable. And that's not the way it's been presented, okay? I have a sheet that I don't have with me. But like in the last 2.5 months, Trump has said that he's going to put tariffs on Canada. And the rationale for that was you have to stop fentanyl from coming into the country. Cool. The reason he's saying fentanyl coming into the country is because the presidency, as I understand it, doesn't have the ability to unilaterally assign tariffs to countries. But if it's a national security issue, he does. And so by saying, hey, we're going to put tariffs on you unless you address the fentanyl issue, it is a national security issue. It's in whatever the presidential powers, emergency powers, whatever, right? But Congress doesn't have to get involved, and Congress really isn't involved. And so they're saying it's because of national security issues. They're claiming fentanyl, all right? And so they're saying, hey, you need to stop fentanyl from coming into the country. If you don't stop fentanyl from coming into the country, then we're going to put tariffs on you. And so they have a conversation over the weekend, and they're like, we're going to do 20% or 40% tariffs on you if fentanyl keeps coming into the country. And Canada says, hey, we're going to do a new fentanyl czar. And they basically commit to a lot of the things they'd already committed to. And Trump says, okay, cool. We had a good call with Canada. We're not going to do tariffs. And so me, in the middle of kind of a supply chain reconstruction from Canada, because maybe it's more cost effective now to produce my bandages in the US than Canada, I'm in the middle of chatting with my team. I'm saying, hey, we're going to maybe start making calls. They're like, okay, no tariffs. Okay, everyone, go back to work. All that hours that I just spent, the week, whatever, screw it. We're just going to lose some money as a business. That was not false alarm. No tariffs on Canada. And then they come back around 3 weeks later and they're like, we're going to do some tariffs on Canada, even though they appointed a czar, and even though I said we were going to be happy with this, we're actually not happy with this. We are going to do tariffs on Canada. At which point Canada says, hey, we're going to do reciprocal tariffs. Number 4, foreign relations. If you ever want to crap on relationships in your life so aggressively that they all walk out, make a deal with them, shake on it, and then change your mind after you've shaken on it. Make a deal with Canada in the 2020s, a trade negotiation where you sit down at the same table, Trump's admin, and agree on all these particulars. And then the moment you get back into office, be like, hey, that deal sucked. We're going to slap you with 20% tariffs. And then get on the phone with them and be like, okay, we're fine. And then immediately 2 weeks later, be like, okay, we're actually going to slap you with those tariffs. Even though you did what you said you were going to do, we're still going to slap you with tariffs. That is a guaranteed, surefire way to screw up your foreign relations. And we've seen it across the board. Because the foreign relations of the U.S., the tariff regime of the U.S. is being unpredictable. What is the tariff situation going to be? And these supply chains are complicated and they involve multiple countries. And so by saying, hey, we're going to do the Canada thing because of fentanyl, and then saying, okay, they agreed to do the thing because of fentanyl, and they agree to do fentanyl, policing more Mounties at the border, whatever the crap, even though like Canadian fentanyl, we don't know if that exists really. I don't know if there's been a ton of seizures like that. So even if, is there massive Canadian fentanyl problems? I don't know. Everything I've read says there isn't, but I may be reading the wrong places. Maybe there's like some place that's, hey, there's a fentanyl seizure on the Canadian border that's 800,000 pounds of fentanyl, which is not something I've seen, but who knows? So if the government knows things I don't know about fentanyl production and distribution from Canada to the US, they may know. I'm not going to claim I know everything. I'm a smart guy, but I'm not an omniscient guy. But what I can say is when you say, hey, we're going to put tariffs on you, and then we have a conversation and we're like, okay, we're not going to put tariffs on you. You agreed to do the fentanyl stuff we talked about. And then you turn around and 2.5 weeks later, you're like, we are going to put tariffs on you. That's a great way to screw up foreign relations. It's a great way to get everyone mad. And then you have this whole Buy Canada thing, and you have the new Prime Minister of Canada getting up and being like, hey, the US-Canadian relationship that we have known for the past 50 years is over. Ooh, that was spicy. That's a spicy conversation there, because they're saying, hey, it's uncertain, they're unreliable now, and so we're just going to say, okay, we're going to have to look at other trade partners, we're going to have to reanalyze our relationship with you, we're going to have to reanalyze our situation with the broader market, like we're going to have to find someone who's more reliable, who's more certain. And so the way the tariff package has been rolled out, by putting them out and then taking them off, and then putting them back out and then taking them back off, and being like, hey, April 2nd is Uncertainty Day, Liberation Day. It should have been called Uncertainty Day. And no one knowing what they were going to be. And then April 2nd came, and like we saw the big board, blue and yellow, and then everyone looked at it, it's like, what in the hell's that? That's not industry specific. That's not tranche specific. That's just one number for the whole country. Is that for the whole country? And at the same time, you have people coming into Trump and like coming into the White House and saying, hey, Tim Cook comes in and says, hey, Apple phones are going to go through the roof. Here's our initial numbers. And then Trump comes out and says, Tim Cook and Apple not subject to the tariffs. Cool. So any other U.S. phone startup who was also sourcing their stuff out of China, they all get to deal with a tariff, where the biggest player in the market doesn't have to deal with a tariff because they went and sat down with Trump and like he liked their pitch. So now the tariff policy only applies to people who don't have access to the administration, and that means Trump, because it's not going through Congress. So you don't have a representative who can actually present this pitch of, hey, this tariff policy is going to affect my industry in a negative way, and I'm going to lose business, and I'm going to have to lay people off, and I'm going to go unprofitable, I'm going to have to raise... No, the only communication that's happening is with the executive branch, because this is all being done under national security issues. And so it's, whoa, are we talking about a tariff policy that effectively is like a cudgel for the executive branch on everyone who's not their friend or who doesn't have their ear? Maybe we should have more than one representative branch involved in this. Maybe we should have Congress be involved in crafting international tariff policy. Or maybe we should craft our international tariff policy through international trade agreements, and we all agree kind of the rules we're going to play by, and then we do that. It might be a bad idea to craft our international tariff policies in the head of one or two dudes and then tell the rest of the world how it's going to be, and then we just all deal with the repercussions, especially when those repercussions are way messier than they're saying they are. Wait, that's the way it's designed. It's supposed to come through Congress. It's supposed to be bills. The only reason it's not coming through Congress is because they're claiming emergency powers. And the only reason they're claiming emergency powers is fentanyl. They're even saying China's importing fentanyl. And if you're going to go after China for importing fentanyl, you probably need to have the de minimis rule, which Trump already addressed and says, hey, we're going to go after the de minimis rule, addressed. Because there's a certain dollar amount imported from China, if it's under a certain dollar amount per product, that comes into the US without even going through customs. That's how Temu and all these like super low price Chinese importers work. They're using the de minimis exception. And that's not even in this round of tariffs. They're like, okay, we're going to be mad at you about the fentanyl, but we're not going to do inspections on all this really cheap Chinese stuff that comes into the market, because we've decided not to do the de minimis rule in the tariff package because someone talked to Trump and said, hey, Amazon's going to get real slow. Other things are going to get real slow if we have to open everything, and it's going to cause more customs and enforcement. We're going to have to hire more people. And it's like, okay, let's leave the de minimis rule alone. So it's like, okay, are we worried about fentanyl or are we not? Because you know where I'd be hiding the fentanyl? In the stuff that doesn't have to go through customs, right? The stuff that's not getting sniffed by dogs. Like, I would be hiding my fentanyl in the places that I'm gonna have the least scrutiny. And so the de minimis rule would be my number one consideration if it came to China and fentanyl. Except it's not about national security. It's about all this other stuff. He's saying, hey, we're going to create all this revenue because I've looked back in history and seen that in the 1800s, the US had all this money coming in because we used to have tariffs, and now we don't. And I'm going to assume that all the trade deals that have ever been negotiated are garbage, and that I alone can fix this thing. And then I'm going to sell the whole country on the fact that tariffs will not increase their prices, which they categorically will, and that it will bring jobs back to the US, which they categorically might or might not, depending on uncertainty. Because if it's uncertain, they absolutely won't bring jobs back to the country. And the fact that in the last 4 months, Trump has proposed and taken off and proposed and taken off and proposed and taken off so many different tariff regimes that I am like, there's no way I'm moving an inch from where I'm standing with crash pads. I'm not doing it. I don't know tomorrow what the tariff regime is going to be. And I bet money that as soon as these like halo tariffs, these flat percentages catch like any wind at all, that they're going to get taken off just one after another, or they're going to get adjusted, and they're all over the map. You can't do tariff policy this way. You can't just throw out these big, huge, overarching things and not think that other countries are going to get super pissed off and do retaliatory tariffs of their own. That's awesome. We haven't even talked about retaliatory tariffs. You think that in this relationship where we are buying from China and they're used to importing $2 trillion a year of stuff, 3 trillion, whatever that number is, that if we just slap all their stuff with a 20% price increase, that they're not going to say, okay, anything you sell in our country has another 20% price increase. You're going to do it to us, we're going to do it. You're going to protect your industries, cool. We're going to protect our industries. And we get in a trade war, we get in a tariff war. It happened, the Hawley-Smoot Act is panned universally, even in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, as a huge failure. Because it did not raise revenue, it did not increase the number of jobs, it deepened the depression that was happening at that time. Like even in Ferris Bueller, even Ferris Bueller laughs at that tariff act, the Hawley-Smoot tariff or trade deal, because it's really complicated. I hope Trump does well. I'm a lifetime Republican. Tariffs are not as clean cut as he's presenting them. Tariffs are not a magic wand. They have enormous impacts to prices, to employment, to foreign relations. They can have positive impacts to defense, to jobs and revenue. But at the end of the day, we all need to understand that prices are going to go up. And the jobs they create may not help you, it may help your neighbor, which can be fine. But they're not a magic wand that's going to yank the US out of debt in the next 5 years. Anyone saying that doesn't understand how tariffs work and is trying to sell you something. If you enjoyed that, I think you'll really enjoy some of our other content. We rehab homes, we have 21 cars on our Turo fleet. We help people buy rental real estate all over the country. Bedrock's doing that huge. We've helped people buy over 5,000 properties. If you enjoyed this conversation, I think the next conversation you'd probably enjoy is I thought my property manager would handle everything. I was wrong. Because we talk about some of the complexities behind investing in real estate as an absentee landlord who doesn't live in the state where you can buy the best deals, but you don't live in the state, so you have to have a property manager. We discuss the fact that property managers don't do everything that it takes to buy real estate. There's a ton of stuff they don't do, and you need to have eyes wide open if you're going to buy property. That's why Bedrock exists. Feel free to call us. If you like that, feel free to call us, and we'll help you buy some rentals. But my number one message for here is it's not that simple. It's not a magic wand. There's a ton of complicated stuff. If you like this, and if this actually does well, we'll come back down and shoot another one on the specific tariff policy and how that ends up being received. If you want to see that other video, click right here.